In the 1940s and 1950s, Australia faced a puzzling challenge: a global demand for wheat combined with unpredictable weather and soil conditions made traditional farming increasingly difficult. In an unconventional experiment, government agencies and agricultural scientists decided to bury enormous quantities of wheat beneath desert sand in controlled conditions, hoping to preserve it for future use. At the time, critics called the idea absurd. How could buried wheat survive in the harsh, arid environment of the Australian outback? Yet the results, revealed decades later, astonished both scientists and farmers. Not only did some of the wheat survive longer than expected, but the experiment also unveiled insights into soil behavior, microbiology, and the natural resilience of grains. Today, we explore this remarkable story, uncovering how human ingenuity, extreme conditions, and patience combined to produce results nobody anticipated. From practical lessons in food preservation to unexpected ecological impacts, the buried wheat experiment provides a fascinating glimpse into science at the edge of possibility. The origins of the wheat preservation experiment: in the mid-20th century, Australia was heavily dependent on wheat exports for economic stability. However, the country faced unpredictable droughts, extreme heat, and soil degradation, which threatened production. Traditional storage methods were proving insufficient, with silos and warehouses vulnerable to pests, moisture, and contamination. Agricultural scientists began exploring alternative methods for preserving surplus wheat for future crises. One radical idea emerged: burying wheat beneath desert sand. The rationale was simple yet bold. The desert environment offered dry conditions and minimal microbial activity, which could slow spoilage. By placing wheat in carefully monitored pits, scientists hoped to test whether grains could survive long periods without conventional storage. While skeptics questioned whether this approach could work, the project was approved as a controlled experiment. Researchers dug large trenches in remote desert regions, lined them to prevent direct contact with soil, and buried thousands of tons of wheat. Data collection was meticulous, with periodic monitoring of temperature, moisture, and grain condition. The experiment was ambitious, blending agricultural science with principles of environmental preservation. At the time, few could have imagined that this experiment would yield insights not only into wheat storage, but also into the hidden potential of desert ecosystems. Selecting the right desert environment, choosing the appropriate desert location was critical for the success of the wheat burial experiment. Scientists needed areas with extremely low rainfall, stable temperatures, and minimal vegetation. The reasoning was that excessive moisture or organic activity could lead to mold, decay, or insect infestation. Remote regions of South Australia and the Northern Territory were selected for their consistent aridity and lack of human interference. These areas provided natural insulation from external disturbances while mimicking the conditions of long-term storage. Researchers conducted soil analysis to determine which sands would provide the best drainage and protect grains from microbial contamination. Wind patterns and temperature fluctuations were also studied, as extreme heat could compromise the grains, while sudden cold snaps might cause condensation. By combining environmental data with agricultural expertise, scientists designed burial pits that would theoretically maximize wheat survival. Some pits were covered with layers of protective fabric or clay to regulate moisture, while others relied solely on natural sand layers. This careful selection process was essential to ensure the experiment was not immediately compromised by external conditions. What emerged over time demonstrated that the desert, once considered hostile and unproductive, could become a natural preservation system when leveraged intelligently. Techniques for burying and protecting the wheat. The methodology for burying wheat went far beyond simply dumping grains into sand. Scientists treated the wheat before burial removing damaged kernels and applying mild anti-fungal treatments to increase longevity. Trenches were dug several meters deep, with layers of sand and protective lining added to create an insulating barrier. Some experiments incorporated clay or straw layers, designed to prevent water seepage and maintain consistent temperature. The wheat was then compacted to reduce air pockets, limiting oxygen that could encourage microbial growth. Each pit was marked and monitored with basic instruments of the era, measuring humidity and temperature fluctuations. Occasionally, small samples were removed to assess spoilage, insect activity, or sprouting. Despite the meticulous design, researchers acknowledged that they were venturing into largely uncharted territory. Few prior studies had tested grain preservation under such extreme conditions for prolonged periods. This experimental rigor was crucial because the wheat was intended not only as a potential emergency food reserve, but also as a scientific inquiry into how desert conditions could influence biological and chemical processes over time. Unexpectedly, the burial techniques themselves would later contribute to unanticipated results, revealing resilience and adaptability in both the wheat and the surrounding ecosystem. Immediate reactions and skepticism. The wheat burial experiment sparked skepticism among farmers, politicians, and even some scientists. Many questioned whether grains could survive under scorching daytime temperatures, cold nights, and shifting sands. Critics warned that insects, rodents, and mold would quickly ruin the buried wheat, making the entire project a waste of resources. Others considered the effort absurd compared to conventional silo storage or refrigerated preservation. Despite criticism, government agencies defended the experiment, framing it as a controlled scientific test with broader potential benefits. The media occasionally covered the story, often emphasizing the eccentricity of burying food in deserts. However, insiders recognized the careful planning and meticulous data collection that underpinned the experiment. Researchers emphasized that the project was as much about learning ecological and chemical principles as it was about storing wheat. Skepticism persisted, but over time, initial doubts gave way to cautious curiosity. When the first few years of monitoring indicated that some wheat remained viable, attention shifted from criticism to astonishment. Observers began to recognize that this unconventional approach could teach lessons about food preservation, grain biology, and environmental interactions that traditional storage methods could never reveal. Early observations. Unexpected survival. Within the first decade of burial, scientists observed something remarkable. Despite extreme conditions, some wheat kernels showed no signs of spoilage or mold. Moisture content remained surprisingly stable, and the protective sand layers prevented exposure to pests. Initial samples indicated that the wheat retained structural integrity and even germination potential. These early results challenged assumptions about grain biology and resilience. Researchers noted that the desert sand acted as a natural insulator, buffering temperature fluctuations and slowing oxidation. Microbial activity was minimal, allowing the wheat to remain preserved far longer than expected. This finding sparked further experiments and modifications as scientists explored which combinations of depth, lining, and soil composition produced the best results. Even critics began to reconsider the potential of desert environments for long-term storage. The initial success also provided practical reassurance. In the event of food shortages or global crises, natural preservation methods could serve as a supplement to conventional storage. Over time, these early observations set the stage for later surprises that would fundamentally change understanding of grain survival and environmental interaction in arid regions. Long-term monitoring and scientific insights. The wheat burial experiment was not intended as a quick test. Researchers planned to monitor the buried grains over decades. Periodic inspections allowed scientists to track moisture levels, temperature fluctuations, and any biological activity in the trenches. Early observations suggested that the grains were far more resilient than anticipated. By analyzing samples over time, researchers discovered that the sand acted as a natural buffer, preventing rapid decay. The long-term data also revealed subtle chemical interactions between the wheat and surrounding soil, which slowed oxidation and preserved germination potential. Interestingly, the buried wheat began to serve as a model for studying natural preservation techniques. Scientists could examine how desert environments affect organic matter over extended periods, providing insights applicable to food security, agriculture, and environmental science. The experiment highlighted that survival is not solely determined by immediate conditions but also by slow, gradual interactions with the environment. These findings encouraged agricultural researchers to rethink assumptions about storage, showing that unconventional methods could sometimes outperform conventional practices. The long-term monitoring became a cornerstone for future studies in ecological preservation and grain biology, proving that careful observation over decades can yield unexpected and valuable results. The role of microbes in natural ecosystems. One of the most surprising revelations from the buried wheat experiment involved microbes. Initially, scientists assumed that arid desert conditions would eliminate microbial activity entirely, but they found a small, specialized community of bacteria and fungi interacting with the grains. This microbial presence did not spoil the wheat. Instead, it appeared to play a role in slowing decomposition. Certain microorganisms form protective biofilms around kernels, creating a barrier against oxidation and pests. The sand and environmental conditions limited microbial diversity, which reduced competition and prevented the proliferation of harmful species. This natural interaction demonstrated a delicate balance between organic material and desert ecosystems. Researchers began to understand that the desert was not an inert environment, but a living system capable of preserving biological material under extreme conditions. The findings have implications beyond wheat preservation, suggesting that microorganisms in deserts may play critical roles in soil stabilization, nutrient cycling, and the survival of other organic matter. The experiment highlighted an unexpected partnership between humans and microbes, where natural ecosystems assisted in achieving preservation goals that technology alone might have struggled to replicate. Germination potential after decades. Perhaps the most astonishing outcome of the wheat burial experiment was the discovery that some grains retained germination potential even decades after burial. When small samples were carefully extracted and tested under laboratory conditions, a portion of the wheat sprouted successfully. This result was remarkable because most scientists believed that seeds buried for long periods in extreme environments would lose viability completely. The preserved grains provided insight into the resilience of wheat as a species, showing that under optimal conditions, even in deserts, seeds can survive far longer than expected. Germination experiments also allowed researchers to analyze genetic stability. Surprisingly, the DNA of these ancient seeds remained largely intact, enabling scientists to study evolutionary adaptations and genetic diversity. This outcome demonstrated that preservation in natural environments is not just a matter of keeping food edible. It is also a means of conserving genetic resources for future research or agriculture. The ability of buried wheat to germinate after decades challenged assumptions about seed longevity and opened new possibilities for preserving crops in extreme climates. It was a testament to both the durability of wheat and the ingenuity of scientists willing to experiment in unorthodox ways. Ecological impacts of the buried wheat. The long-term presence of wheat in desert ecosystems also produced unexpected ecological consequences. While the buried grains were initially isolated from local flora and fauna, over time, small rodents and insects occasionally accessed the pits, feeding on surplus wheat and dispersing kernels into nearby soil. This accidental introduction contributed to localized changes in plant growth, as some wheat sprouted naturally under the sand, altering soil composition and nutrient cycles. Additionally, microbial activity in and around the trenches appeared to increase soil fertility slightly, suggesting that even buried grains could influence the broader ecosystem. These ecological impacts were subtle, yet they highlighted the complex interactions between human interventions and natural environments. The experiment inadvertently became a case study in how agriculture and ecology intersect, revealing that even a single human experiment can have ripple effects on desert landscapes. Understanding these impacts was crucial for future projects in land management, desert agriculture, and environmental conservation. The buried wheat experiment showed that science does not exist in a vacuum. Even well-controlled experiments interact with living systems in ways that can be informative, surprising, or sometimes transformative. Lessons in food security and preservation. The experiment offered lessons that went far beyond academic curiosity. Australia, like many nations, faced recurring droughts and food shortages, making long-term preservation strategies critical. The survival of wheat in the desert suggested that alternative storage methods could supplement conventional silos and warehouses, providing a buffer against climate variability, pest infestations, and global supply disruptions. Scientists and policymakers realized that leveraging natural environments strategically, rather than relying solely on technology, could enhance resilience. The experiment also inspired research into other crops, testing how legumes, barley, and grains could be preserved under similar conditions. Beyond national food security, the findings had global relevance. They suggested that extreme environments, previously considered unsuitable for storage, might offer cost-effective, sustainable solutions for preserving food resources. The project ultimately demonstrated that bold experimentation, patience, and careful observation can yield practical insights with far-reaching consequences. What began as an unconventional idea in the Australian desert evolved into a blueprint for thinking creatively about agriculture, sustainability, and resource management. Surprising longevity of the buried wheat. Decades into the experiment, the most surprising discovery was how long some wheat grains could survive beneath desert sand. Scientists initially expected partial spoilage or total loss within a few years, but systematic testing revealed that many kernels remained viable even after 20 to 30 years. These grains preserved their structure, retained moisture balance, and in some cases were capable of germination when exposed to optimal conditions. Researchers realized that the desert's arid climate, combined with compacted sand layers, effectively slowed down decomposition and created a stable microenvironment. Chemical analyses showed minimal oxidation, while microbial activity was limited to harmless species that did not compromise the wheat. This longevity was far beyond conventional storage expectations, demonstrating that extreme natural conditions could substitute for technological preservation in unexpected ways. Beyond its practical implications, the experiment revealed a broader lesson about resilience in biological systems. Wheat, as a species, possesses inherent mechanisms that allow it to survive prolonged periods without active care, a trait that has likely contributed to its dominance as a global staple. The study of these grains also opened up avenues for exploring the genetic and physiological factors behind seed longevity, offering insights into crop resilience in modern agriculture. Unexpected ecological contributions. The buried wheat experiment did not just preserve grains. It also influenced the desert ecosystem in subtle, unanticipated ways. Small rodents, insects, and occasional birds began interacting with the trenches, feeding on accessible grains and inadvertently dispersing seeds into surrounding soil. Some of these kernels sprouted naturally, creating small patches of wheat growth in areas where cultivation was previously impossible. Microbial communities in the sand adapted to the presence of wheat, enhancing nutrient cycles and soil stability. These effects were unplanned but informative, highlighting how human interventions can ripple through natural systems. Researchers found that long-term burial can unintentionally foster biodiversity by creating microhabitats and nutrient hotspots, even in harsh desert climates. The experiment underscored the idea that human ingenuity, when paired with natural environments, can produce outcomes that are both scientifically valuable and ecologically instructive. Beyond practical preservation, the study contributed to a deeper understanding of how ecosystems respond to human, introduced materials over decades. These insights influenced future strategies in environmental conservation, soil management, and sustainable agriculture, proving that the experiment's impact extended far beyond wheat storage. Lessons for modern food security. One of the most important takeaways from the buried wheat experiment is its relevance to modern food security. Australia and many countries today face challenges of climate change, unpredictable weather patterns, and supply chain vulnerabilities. The experiment demonstrated that natural environments can provide stable, low-cost alternatives for long-term storage. While modern silos, refrigeration, and climate-controlled warehouses remain essential, the resilience of wheat under desert conditions offers insights into supplemental strategies for emergencies. Governments and agricultural agencies can use this knowledge to plan for scenarios in which conventional storage fails or resources are constrained. Additionally, the research emphasized the importance of patience, observation, and experimentation. By taking unconventional approaches and testing them rigorously, scientists uncovered solutions that would have been impossible to predict. These lessons extend beyond wheat and Australia, inspiring global agricultural innovation in crop preservation, emergency food reserves, and sustainable resource management. The Buried Wheat Project became a case study in adaptive thinking, demonstrating that sometimes the most extreme environments hold untapped potential for solving critical problems. Technological applications and innovations. The findings from the buried wheat experiment also sparked technological innovation in agriculture and food science. By understanding how the desert preserved grains naturally, researchers developed improved packaging methods, controlled microenvironments, and storage techniques that mimic natural preservation processes. Insights gained from monitoring temperature, moisture, and microbial interactions informed new silo designs and grain treatments that extend shelf life. Beyond agriculture, the experiment influenced food preservation research in areas such as freeze, drying, vacuum sealing, and long-term seed banking. Scientists realized that combining natural principles with technology could create hybrid solutions that are both cost-effective and environmentally sustainable. The experiment highlighted the value of long-term research and interdisciplinary approaches as it drew from ecology, microbiology, engineering, and agronomy. Its results demonstrated that innovation often comes from observing natural systems and translating those lessons into practical applications. The Buried Wheat Project became a model for combining empirical observation with experimental design, emphasizing that extreme environments can teach valuable lessons about resilience, preservation, and sustainability. Public perception and media attention. As the decades passed, the buried wheat experiment began attracting attention beyond scientific circles. Media outlets reported on the unusual practice, describing it as eccentric, yet highlighting its surprising results. The public was fascinated by the idea that grains buried under sand in the harsh Australian desert could survive for decades. Educational programs and documentaries featured the story, emphasizing the combination of human ingenuity, patience, and natural resilience. Scientists were able to use this attention to communicate broader messages about food security, sustainable practices, and the importance of experimental thinking. Despite initial skepticism, the experiment became a celebrated example of how unconventional ideas can yield valuable insights. Public interest helped inspire future research in crop preservation and demonstrated that curiosity-driven science can have both practical and cultural impact. The buried wheat experiment showed that science is not just about data. It is about ideas, exploration, and sometimes taking calculated risks that challenge conventional wisdom. Long-term economic implications. Beyond the scientific and ecological revelations, the buried wheat experiment carried significant economic implications for Australia. The ability to preserve thousands of tons of wheat over decades offered a strategic reserve that could stabilize supply during periods of drought, poor harvests, or global market fluctuations. At a time when wheat exports were a major pillar of the national economy, this unconventional preservation method demonstrated that alternative strategies could protect both farmers and the broader agricultural sector. The experiment also highlighted the cost-effectiveness of leveraging natural environments instead of relying solely on expensive storage facilities or constant human intervention. Maintaining a natural desert reserve required minimal energy input and reduced the risk of spoilage compared to traditional warehouses. Additionally, the experiment served as a proof of concept for large-scale grain preservation in other arid regions around the world. Countries with similar environmental challenges could adopt insights from the Australian model, creating long-term food security systems that are sustainable, low-cost, and resilient. Economists and agricultural policymakers began to study the potential of combining natural preservation with modern storage infrastructure, ensuring that lessons from this experiment could have practical applications well into the future. Ultimately, the buried wheat project demonstrated that careful experimentation in extreme environments can yield solutions that benefit both science and society, turning an initially bizarre idea into a strategic asset for the nation. The shocking results revealed years later, when scientists and agricultural authorities finally conducted a comprehensive review of the buried wheat decades after the initial experiment. The results were shocking. Not only had significant portions of the wheat survived intact, but some kernels were still capable of germination, demonstrating resilience far beyond expectations. The experiment revealed that natural desert conditions, arid climate, sand insulation, and minimal microbial activity could create an almost perfect preservation environment. Beyond grain viability, the project uncovered subtle ecological interactions, such as minor changes in soil composition and microbial communities, highlighting the unexpected environmental impacts of human interventions. These findings transformed initial skepticism into admiration.